welcome to Viewpoints, brought to you by Equiture, the leading provider in public safety software and training. My name is Sherry Bartram, and I will be your host today. A little bit about us before we get started. We are an international leader in public safety training and technology, with products geared toward providing tools to help responders stay safe and educated. For those of you who are new to us, we offer monthly podcasts with a variety of guests geared toward public safety topics, as well as monthly webinars and a diverse offering of training courses. Today on our show, we will be talking with Carol Staben-Burroughs. Carol, brought to us by our own Carrie O'Connell, is a licensed behavioral health counselor in Bozeman, Montana. She has an extensive background in critical incident stress, not only domestic, but on an international level. She frequently works with public safety professionals and has trained hundreds in critical incident stress management. She enjoys interactive presentations where she can present her material with her naturally humorous and high energy training style. Carol and her husband Grant have a daughter and a granddaughter and stay busy during their downtime with church and community organizations. Carol, I am truly delighted to have you on our show today.
I'm happy to be here.
I know when we chatted earlier, we talked about critical incident stress management and the shift we've seen in public safety to recognize the need to recognize this need altogether. So I'm really happy to have you here with us today.
Well, it's what I do. I sort of live, eat, and breathe it.
That's great. That's great. I know when I started back in the, as my youngest daughter would say, back in the 1980s, there was just nothing like this. So when I did the introductions, I mentioned that you have an extensive background, but how long have you been working specifically with the critical incident stress management field?
You know, I was invited to join our newly forming critical incident stress management team here in Gallatin County, Montana in 1990. So 34 years. We had two quadruple fatality crashes in a year, 18 months, and the leadership of the community first responder agencies, our sheriff, our police chief, fire chief, all recognized the toll those were taken on the first responders. And so they invited me to be part of our newly forming team. And so our team was trained and became operational November 1st, 1991.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So you just had your anniversary.
We did. We had a happy birthday at our meeting, our team meeting. Yeah.
So that's when you officially started in this with public safety.
Yes. I didn't know a thing. I'd been doing counseling for 2 years. I didn't know that first responder work would become the focus of my life and my career. But as our team started, I continued to get more training in working with public safety personnel. And, the more trainings I took, the more we did critical incident stress debriefings after really traumatic events here in our community and others. We travel. It's just what I learned to do. And then I became a trainer for the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation in 1995. So I teach 3 classes for the ICISF.
Wow.
Yeah.
When people think of critical incident stress, I mean, I know there is a lot of talk about critical incident stress now. They may think of that one incident that just, got them. They can't sleep. They become preoccupied. For those people in 911, they may be slower to answer the phone, the 911 call when it rings. They just don't want to hear what's on the other side of that call. So can you give us an actual definition and describe what a critical incident may be?
Okay. Well, the background of it is any event outside the usual realm of human experience that's markedly distressing, and it can evoke reactions of intense fear, helplessness, or horror. Okay, so that's the clinical definition.
Okay.
Now, what is that? Officer-involved shootings, line-of-duty deaths, suicide of a colleague. In 911, it would be not being able to get your officer, get your officer to respond to you, and fear for his or her safety. Doing CPR with a person who's trying to keep their loved one alive. Sometimes people don't want to die alone, so they call you. They call a 911 dispatcher and take their life while you're on the phone with them. And those are events that critical events with kids, where kids are injured or killed, are usually traumatic for the responders. Sometimes burned bodies, physically traumatic car crashes, things like that, where there's a lot of physical trauma to the body. It can also include something like a manhunt, or anything where your body is exposed to the chemicals of stress for quite a while. So that's the second definition of what a traumatic event might be. Another would be when you think you're getting one thing and then you get something else. And so your brain can't prepare for it. So it's like, I've heard people tell me things like, we heard it was a suicide call. And so we're going to the suicide call, and then we're almost there and we find out it's a 10-year-old. And so it's like, all of a sudden, what you thought you were going to get isn't what you got. And that can cause a traumatic reaction.
Yeah.
Long answer to a short question.
No, that's helpful because I think, we compartmentalize probably many different lines of work, but this is all I've known. So I think okay, this is this, and this is this, and this is this. And then I think sometimes we experience critical incident stress because we thought it was in these boxes and it ends up being over here. And we're like, well, why am I feeling this way? It doesn't fit any of this. So
it's when you don't see things, you don't see it coming. Right. And even if our brains have a few seconds, like a minute, to prepare for something, we're going to go into that with a better emotionally prepared. But if we're just confronted with something, we thought it was this and now it's this, it's like slamming on the brakes and crashing, Yeah,
right.
It hits our brains kind of hard.
So those are sudden events. What then is the difference between cumulative and non-cumulative traumatic stress?
Well, okay. Most cumulative stress is not critical. Okay. Now, people in your profession, all first responder professions, have years of built up. I mean, if you have multiple critical incidents over time, so you're going to have the buildup of cumulative critical incident stress, and then there's cumulative non-traumatic stressors. And they kind of look alike. But when you have trauma, cumulative non-traumatic stressor buildup, it's more, you're going to see things like grumpiness and, mood changes, don't want to come to work, showing up late, attitude, maybe getting in trouble at work, maybe more cynicism, things like that. Whereas if you have cumulative traumatic stress buildup, you're going to see things. It's not across the board, and everybody's a little different, but you're going to see more jumpiness, more anxiety, things like that. So the critical incident stressors over time that haven't been dealt with can lead to poor choices in work. Both of them can, but you see that a little more with traumatic stress buildup. So does that make sense?
It does. And that was actually one of my questions. I was going to say, I assume that they present in each person differently. And you already kind of described some of those differences for us.
Yeah. Everybody's different. And for some people, well, if you're early on the job, what's a critical event when you're early in your career may not be a critical event when you're later in your career, because you've seen it all. You've kind of, you build what we call a trauma barrier in the first 2 to 5 years on the job. It's like this little protective barrier around your heart. And so you've responded to a number of suicides, and you've responded to a number of CPRs in progress, and you respond to, various calls that you sort of know what they're going to be like. And so your brain, because of that trauma barrier in time, preps itself. So that helps you. But once in a while, there's that thing that slips underneath that trauma barrier that can get to you that you just didn't see coming. And
Right.
so sometimes where we're at in our family life cycle makes us more vulnerable. So if you've got little kids and you're at a little kid call, it might be worse than if you don't have any children at all, or if your kids are, older. So the things that we we personalize can make things traumatic too.
That's interesting you say that. Like, I've watched people go through that cycle. They come in, they don't have kids, and then they have kids, and then they deal with those calls differently. And
Yeah,
then,
they do.
they get older, and then they're better. And then you get the older people who have grandkids. And then,
Yep.
then they feel the same way. Right. Now they're right back to where they were.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's harder for people who have been in this line of work for a while, when they see somebody newer reacting to a call. Maybe not so much. I think we're moving away from that mindset, but it's probably still out there. So it's good for people to be aware of what you said. You look at somebody who's newer and they're reacting to this event they had, and you're like, what's their problem? I get those calls all the time, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You have to remember what it was like. We have to remember what it was like when we started in our career. We didn't know it all and do it all the first week or month or year. And we forget, I think, after we get in the job for a long time.
Yep, that is very true. We think we knew it all.
Don't we all?
Yeah. So when you and I first talked, you mentioned the first line of defense, the first line of defense, and I love that concept. Can you talk with us a little bit about that?
Sure. In the trainings that I do peer support trainings. One of the things we do, our first line of defense is ourselves. We look in our own little mirror here, And so I need to be aware of what my body, my brain, my heart is telling me. So if I know if I know when my body's telling me I'm getting overwhelmed, I can take care of myself, right? So I'm my first line of defense. next to that is going to be my family, but also in the job, we want peers to be able to say, hey, you're not yourself. You seem off. You don't, is something going on? You know, we want you guys in the job to be able to reach out to each other. We want you to know each other well, trust each other well, have those relationships so that you can see when one of your coworkers is off. And that might be from a critical call, or it might be something happening at home, a sick family member, or a kid who's ill, or a breakup, or a divorce, or death in the family, death of a pet, all those things we want. So the first line of defense is ourselves. And ideally people could say, I need to talk. Could I just talk to you for a minute? Because talking's really the best thing you can do. So I can reach out myself, or you reach out to me.
Well, I have a question about that. So sometimes I feel like people should be cautioned about who they reach out to talk to, because that might not be a good idea. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yes.
Okay.
So one of the things in my trainings that I try to instill is have a culture of no gossip, no backbiting, no nastiness. Try to look at your coworkers with grace, because if you can't trust somebody to keep your confidence, you should not talk to that person. And unfortunately, you might not know they're not trustable until too late. So the culture of a department is really one of the most important things for setting up peer-to-peer support. So your question was knowing who to talk to. You as a supervisor probably aren't going to reach out to one of your new employees to talk about something stressful in your life, but you might talk to your coworker who's been on the job with you for 20 years, who's your age. That might be easier to talk to, someone who's your friend, even if they're not at the same level as you are.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. I've seen situations in PSAPs, in dispatch centers. It probably occurs, in most workplaces where, they think their trusted friend, I would give my life for that person kind of friend is the person they can reach out and share their heart and soul with, not knowing that that person is just destroying them behind their back. And I cringe when I see that kind of relationship, because you can't tell them anything.
But as administrators, and I know some of the people listening to this are supervisors and heads of the department, shut that shit down fast. If you can, if you hear someone gossiping about somebody else, take them aside and say, cut it out. Because we can't have that here, or it will destroy your 911 center. People won't stay. So the longevity of a person's job, they'll leave because they can't trust their coworkers. So setting up that culture of trust and confidentiality and reliability is huge.
Yeah, I used to tell the dispatchers that I worked with, that one person can't create that kind of a culture that everybody wants. It really does take the whole center.
It does.
And I'm not sure that people always understand that until you actually see it in motion.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the things I'll put in the plug for peer support. Those are the things, if a person wants to be on your peer support team within your 911 center, that's one of the first requirements is you can't gossip. You can't talk about what that person shared with you. You've got to be just, as confidential as you can be.
Yeah, just a stellar example of.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back to our first line of defense in public safety, no matter what discipline we're discussing, law, fire, EMS, 911, we talk a lot about the big call that can trigger these events. What about when a person has a personal event? Have you ever seen that trigger a critical incident stress event that just profoundly impacts their work?
Well, a personal event, if one of your dispatchers, if a parent dies or child dies, I mean, we're talking, big things that of course it will disrupt. And so one of the things with peer support is we don't just leave that for the critical events. We want them to develop friendships so that when those things happen, yeah, absolutely, you're going to see a diminishment of their productivity, probably their desire to come to work. If you have grief reactions going on, it's not going to trigger a critical incident response, usually, unless your dispatcher maybe took their own parents' 911 call or grandparents' 911 call, or they were there doing the CPR at home and made the call. Or, if they're not going to have a trauma reaction if there's not trauma. There'll be grief reactions, which can look similar, but they're not as sharp with the chemicals of stress,
Okay.
Okay.
Well, so if somebody comes in with that, that look of trauma or grief, and the coworkers see it, whether it's personal or work, what should people do? What should the peers do, the employees do, even if it's a boss, if they
Yeah.
have this traumatic event that just rocks their world?
Yeah.
How do people get involved? What do you recommend? If there's a peer support team in place, that's probably easier because someone has been trained. But what if some of our audience that's listening, what if they don't have that?
Oh my gosh, you just do what you would do with any friend. You can say, I'm so sad to hear about your mom's death, dad's death, what pet's death. You know, how are you? What's it been like for you? I've noticed you have tears in your eyes. Do you need a little bit of a break? Those are this, it's just kindness. It's giving them a little extra grace. Maybe that they need extra time off, depending on the situation. But mostly just kindness, care, reaching out, and be able, what you're gonna see when someone has a trauma, or not even a trauma reaction, but a grief reaction, you're often going to see physical changes and cognitive and emotional, maybe behavioral changes. And so they're easy to say, you seem different in this way, and this way. And I'm wondering what's going on. And then that person can say, our family's trying to decide when to do the burial or the funeral or I just miss my whoever so much. Let them, all they have to do is talk, and they're going to feel better if they talk. So that's that you don't have to be peer support to do that.
All right. So we've talked about the power of peers, just kindness. What I've seen throughout my career, sometimes the leadership, the managers, directors, chiefs, they kind of are without peers within their organization. you mentioned that supervisor, they can't necessarily talk to their, their subordinates. Um,
Yeah.
what what would you say? Now, I'm not necessarily talking about a personal trauma. They may have taken the bad call, right?
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
where would you recommend they turn when they have any kind of trauma event like you've described?
Okay. I've seen it in a couple of ways. So, in one, well, in a couple of situations, if you've got a really small agency, a small dispatch center, and we do a CISD or a check-in for somebody when there's been a critical call, sometimes it's just perfectly easy for people to talk to each other. So it's all going to depend on the relationship with your coworkers. Now, one of the things I recommend at the police chief level, captain level, sheriff level, head of the EMS, 911 dispatch center, supervisors, get to know the people who do your job in other places. So if you're here in Gallatin County and you're the head of our agency, of our 911 center, get to know the people who are the head of the 911 center in other towns, so that when something happens, you can call and say, can I talk to you for a bit? I had this shitty, crappy, ugly call that I don't want to talk to my coworkers about, you know? Or have a employee assistance program person, a therapist on the line, that you could call and just say, look, I just need to download this. I need to get it out and talk to somebody. That would be my recommendation.
Well, when we talked, you talked a little bit about culturally competent. I have not heard that term a lot. Could
Mm-hmm.
you describe what that means in the context of what we're talking about today?
Yes. But I want to back up.
Okay.
The other person who's available to you, or group of people who are available to you, to most dispatchers, are chaplains. So fire service chaplains, law enforcement chaplains are really good people to do peer support with supervisors. So that I
I'm
forgot
glad
to
you mentioned
mention.
that. Yeah, we at Equiture we have a whole class in our course catalog on the chaplain program and how to start one up. So
Good, good,
yeah, yeah,
cool. Yeah, most medium to large agencies have chaplains. And the chaplains, even if it's a police chaplain, they're going to talk to the firefighters, the dispatchers, and whoever else might need it. They're not just for the law enforcement. And
right.
so let's move on. What's a culturally competent therapist? A culturally competent therapist is one who has had extra training beyond our regular therapy stuff, who's had extra training in working with first responders, and the culture of first responders. You guys don't think like the average person does. Um, the things that the average person is distressed or bothered by are not even going to hit your radar. And so a lot of therapists have failed greatly by uh, treating a cop on their couch like a regular client. So a culturally competent therapist would not ask a officer to leave their weapon in the car. A culturally competent therapist would not say something like, "Oh, I'm so sorry you had to shoot and kill that person," because that's just not. A culturally competent therapist understands, wow, you went home, you did your job.
Right.
We understand that the weapon you bring into our office is part of your uniform. You can't take it off. So it's things like that that uh, make for a culturally competent therapist. It's the understanding that if you come to me and say, yeah, I think about suicide sometimes, I know, yeah, most first responders do think about suicide at a higher rate than other people. Are you thinking about killing yourself? That's a different deal. But thinking about suicide, so there are just, I just listed three, but I there's a whole bunch of stuff that when you understand the work they have to do, the things you hear, see, smell, touch, and are exposed to, you're not gonna, the little stuff doesn't matter so much to people in your profession. And so as a therapist, I wouldn't try to make the little stuff big for you.
Well, I know because you've told me you've taken the time and invested yourself to become more familiar with, the first responders. But for an employee assistance or, for an agency, how would you recommend that they help maybe their EAP's program to develop someone who's culturally competent? What if they don't have a you who is, really in there and wanting to learn? How do they reach out and draw that person in? Because that is one of the biggest complaints I've heard, when someone has gone to a counselor at an EAP, is that was a waste of time. I feel like they have no clue what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, okay. One of the things I'm trying to make more culturally competent therapists in the world. That's one of my things I'm trying to do before I retire in a few years. If you call an employee assistance program, you just call that number and say, I want to talk to a therapist. I'm a dispatcher. Do you have any therapists who are culturally competent in working with first responders? That would be the first thing I would do. And that way, if they don't have anybody on their rolls and people start they're getting requests for that, then maybe that agency will get those therapists some training in that. But that's one of the things you guys are going to have to do, is say, I'd like a culturally competent therapist to work with first responders. And if they go, go to somebody privately in your community. Most of the times your health insurance is going to pay for therapy. A lot of times you'll have there would be culturally competent therapists who are in your employee assistance program who you may not know about. That didn't come out right. Yeah.
Yeah, I understood. I understood what you were talking about. I don't know if you want to try and clarify it.
Yeah, like there's a number of therapists here in my city accept all of your employee assistance program. We basically get paid half of what we bill. So that's, a lot of therapists don't want to do that. So because it's a cut in income. But a lot of people do. Yeah, a lot of people do. And you can ask, will you accept my employee assistance program? So a lot of times people will already have mental health people who they talk to, and then they ask that therapist, would you take extra training in this? So, and then we get more people then more officially culturally competent. And part of cultural competence is doing ride-alongs. Go into the dispatch center, ride along with a cop for, 2 or 3 times a year, or with the fire department, or with the EMS, if you can. Some agencies are a little more iffy on who can ride, but I've gone to the dispatch center a number of times. Back in the day before HIPAA, went and rode along at the emergency department at the hospital,
I have found that it's easier to ride with an officer than it is EMS.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But that's what shows your interest. If I show up a couple of times a year at uh, the police station or dispatch center and hand out some pens that I have made, and just say hi to people. And you could that's what a therapist could do to get to know the people in the various agencies.
And that sure, just like the chaplains program, that sure does help break down those barriers
Yeah, because we're
for
just
when they're
regular.
needed.
Yeah, we put on our pants the same way everybody else does. If we're not working, we're not assessing and judging, and we don't go to parties and look at you and diagnose. We're not doing that. So, but people have a stigma. Or mental health people have a bad rap that we're somehow special, and nah. So if I can go right along and get to know me and I get to know you, that trust is built, and that trust goes up and the stigma goes down.
Well, isn't that just like, law enforcement or EMS, fire? You go out. That's why they associate with their own profession. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you associate with somebody not in your profession, hey, I got pulled over the other day and I was only going, whatever, or, hey, I have a stomach ache, or, um, my smoke alarm is going off. Do you think I should get out? Or, I mean, you know, change the battery. When was the last time you changed battery? I don't know. It's been like 3 years.
It's those are the things I hear from dispatchers that are it's the buildup of the little things. It's the chronic calls. It's the needy, lonely people who call in, the people who don't make any sense, that sort of jade the way you look at people. It's like you begin to think that everybody who doesn't do this job is just stupid or idiots.
Well, I and we need to close here, but I do have to tell you, since you said that, a
Yeah.
funny story. I spent several years of my career in a mountain community, and we would get snow and ice, and we'd get these phone calls because I just want to know, how are the roads down the mountain.
Uh-huh.
We had windows in our dispatch center, and we'd look out there. You could hardly see across the parking lot. It's snowing
Right.
so hard. And I said, I can't wait till my last day. I'm going to say all the heaters we installed in the mountain roads are working. Roads are clear and dry. I just wanted to say that
The
just
last
once.
day.
I didn't. I didn't say
I
it.
know.
We
I
always
know.
said the roads are snow covered and slippery. Really? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Well,
I
and it's those kinds of calls that are making up the cumulative stress. It's like, no, 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 please just call us when you have an emergency. Don't call us for this other, 30% of crap that isn't, it's below our pay grade.
Yeah, and you just shake your head and you
Yeah,
wait
you
for the
do.
next call.
I
You
encourage
call.
people take to make a log and write a book about
Oh,
this.
I did write a book, but not about that. But I tell when I'm teaching new dispatchers or something, I always tell them it may seem silly, but I wish I had wrote down some of those stories because they're so funny.
Hmm.
The ones I can remember
Yeah,
are
of
so
course.
funny. So for you out there listening, start now. Write
Mhm.
write your stories down. Even if you never write a book, it'll be really funny because you'll forget them, and then you'll go back and you'll say, "Oh, I remember that."
Can I say one more thing about writing?
Absolutely.
If you're talking or writing something down, you're healing. So if you have the tragic call, the traumatic call, or the personal life event that is hard, write it down in as great a detail as you can. So one of the things when I teach new dispatchers or new cops or new anybody, I tell them to get themselves a little spiral notebook, and that's going to be your trauma journal. So when you have those really bad days, write it down in as great a detail as you can. because when you can do that, it kind of takes it out of here and it downloads it to the piece of paper, so that your brain doesn't have to keep trying to remember it, or because our brains will replay things to try to protect ourselves. So, or protect our brain from the next bad thing. So if you can write it down, it gets it outside of you. Or if you can talk about it, it gets it outside of you. So
Great advice. Thank you so much, Carol, for being with us today. And for our audience, if you have any questions for Carol and you would like to be in touch with her, please contact me or Heather from here at Equiture, and we can get you in touch with Carol. I hope you all have a great day. Be safe, and remember to keep those journals. Bye, everyone.
Bye.